White gonna be here? But David will not, you said.
David's out of town.
He's in Costa Rica. Okay.
And Alice told me he would be here.
Okay.
Alex, it says you're talking. We can't hear anything.
Is it good to still talking here, or are they outside planting bombs?
It's got.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Bill Shy. I'm the chair of the Planning and Zoning Commission, and we're here for our regular monthly meeting. I want to welcome everybody that's here in person, all two of you, and there are some on the Zoom also, but I can't see the Zoom, so I don't know who's there. But we're glad you're here. Let me just do a couple of reminders. Those of us in the room on the commission, if you remember to turn on your microphone when you're speaking and turn it off when you're not. Or Alex says leave it on. Okay. On those of you on Zoom, it would probably be helpful if you mute your microphone except when you're talking, because that's easier for everyone to hear. And I think that's only the only housekeeping things I need to say. Let's have a moment of silence, if we will. And before we do that, I'd like to say that, you know, we're all here together as people who love Montreat. And we all profess to have faith. And I want to say that Richard White at Christ Community this week just gave a powerful sermon that reminded me that those of us who are called to be Christians, we not only profess our faith, but we bring that faith to the communities in which we live by being agents of reconciliation and being listeners and being appreciative of the gifts and talents of others. So that's what we on the commission are going to try to do today. We do have a somewhat controversial theme, although the MRA application is not before us, only the amendments to the zoning ordinance, which y'all know we've been working on for 2 years and finished up in November before any of this came up. So what we're really doing is considering the modernization of the zoning ordinance as the town is required to do by Chapter 160D of the North Carolina statutes, which was enacted last year. They are required to adopt or reaffirm a zoning ordinance by July 1st of this year. So that's what we're working for. And with that, let's have a moment of silence. Amen. Again, thank you all for being here. The first thing we'll do is adopt the agenda if the commission is so willing. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So move.
Second.
It's been moved to second. That's not discussable. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you very much. I would note that we do have a quorum present. The first item of business is the reconsideration of the minutes from February 4th, which Angie had presented at our March meeting, and there were some comments about it and some changes, which we have worked on as it relates to 3 ordinance provisions that were suggested to be included. I would entertain a motion to adopt as amended the February 4th meeting minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I think we've all got confused a little bit on those minutes, but it appears to me that it still needs to be one modification to the February 4th minutes, at least the ones I've got. I think I have the latest version. On this second page, where it said Mason Blake moved to approve the 2 ordinances, which is above, and then it says, along with the recommendation for an additional 2 years extension as recommended by the Planning and Zoning Commission and approved by the Monterey Board of Commissioners as presented. It appears that we have revised the amendment, the ordinances themselves to include that 2 years, so I don't think it needs to have an additional 2 years tacked on to the already 2 years we put in it. I know that's even confusing itself. The whole thing is confusing, I think. But I think it would be appropriate if you just change that sentence, Angie, to where it reads, Mason Blake moved to approve the 2 ordinance changes above, period, and just delete the rest of that sentence.
Is that a motion to adopt the
Yes.
minutes with that amendment?
Yeah, I make a motion to adopt the minutes with that one change.
And is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. The March 11th meeting minutes were also circulated. Is there a motion to adopt them?
I so move.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you very much. The item of new business and really the substantial business that we have before us today is the continued presentation of the proposed revision to the zoning ordinance that the commission has been working on for some time. There's a group which I'll just call the Hayner Group, because I've been talking to Priscilla Hayner, who I think is on the Zoom call, but I want to appreciate Priscilla's willing and listening ear and present in the proposals that they make. So what I'd like to do is call on Priscilla or another one of that group to present the points of concern that they submitted dated April 5th. That has been circulated to all members of the commission. So Priscilla, are you there, or someone that's going to speak for you? There. Is your microphone on? Alex, can you tell what's going on?
Ms. Hayner, are you available to speak?
She just got off.
She may have some,
Can you hear me now?
yes.
Oh, great. Okay. There was a little box that came up. I think the person, whoever has the authority over the Zoom meeting, had to unmute me. So thank you so much. And I don't think you can hear me, see me. Is that right? You can only hear me?
That's correct.
Okay. Which is unfortunate because it makes conversation easier, but I can see you, which is good. So thank you so much. And thank you, Chairman, for the invitation to speak, and also for you all deciding to reopen the ordinance. I know you've spent a couple of years working very hard on the ordinance. It's not an easy process. It's not an easy document in any context. So I appreciate you reopening this again and allowing input and community discussion. The letter that we sent, myself with 2 family members, on our own behalf. We don't represent anybody else. We don't represent Montreat Stewards per se. Certainly, it's coming from the three of us. We sent it a few days ago with the intention to try to address some of the questions that we see as still open and needing attention in the new proposed ordinance, primarily along the lines of two areas. One is essentially aligning the new proposed ordinance with the language of the old in some specific ways where we think there has been, perhaps unintentional, but there has been some weakening of protections and rights. And the second is three specific additions, both so that the ordinance will comply with North Carolina law, as the chairman mentioned, the new statute, as well as complying specifically with Montreat's comprehensive plan. I'll just say a word about each of these, and if you'd like, then we can walk through the specific aspects, but I'll just be very brief, perhaps as an overview. And then if you allow, and as you wish in terms of how specific you'd like us to be, we can then enter into each of the recommendations. The first group in terms of pertaining to the special use permits, of course, is replacing the conditional use permits from the old ordinance. That's fine, but in that process, there were quite a number of changes made, and we're not aware of any reason or intention or specific justification for intending to weaken the rights of participation, for example, or the protections pertaining to homeowners and residents in Montreat. So thus, we made specific recommendations as to what language could be reinserted essentially directly from in most cases, directly from the old ordinance in order to correct these changes. In a sentence, this pertains first to the opportunity for public input if a special use permit is applied for. It has been reduced in the new proposed ordinance. Secondly, it weakens or in some cases eliminates protections for Montreat residents, community members, property owners pertaining to a number of specific elements, which we can return to. And the third is that there's a perhaps not intentional, but there's a shift in the burden of proof or in the burden of persuasion. Once an application for a special use permit is in, most of the burden then shifts or much of the burden then shifts to those who would be opposed if somebody is opposed to such an application. Which is, we think, not the best way that should be shaped. The second group, the additions that I mentioned, pertain to three specific areas. The first is that of conflict of interest, and this is just straight a reflection of the new requirement in the General Statute of North Carolina 160D, which does require that conflict of interest language is included. There's an option, there's 2 or 3 options as to how to include that. One can include it by copying and pasting the text as is in the statute, or one can strengthen it and add other specificities, or by reference. And we think the best way minimally is to include copy and paste with a couple of clarifications, the conflict of interest language that is there in the statute. Secondly, there are, or second and third, the last 2 points in terms of additions pertain directly to those conclusions, the clear conclusions and signals from the comprehensive plan of Montreat of 2008, pertaining to the preservation, historical preservation, especially of the built, the built environment, and secondly, environmental protections and preservations. So there are specific elements there that we put forward. So if you would like, and perhaps, Mr. Chairman, you can designate whether you all would like to put questions or discuss, or if you'd like, I can ask, for example, my cousin Evan Williams, who was one of the legal minds behind this. He could go into some of the specifics along the special use permit recommendations, but I turn it back over to you. You can direct us from here, what's most useful.
Thank you, Priscilla. And again, I appreciate your the whole tone of your remarks are gracious, and I appreciate that. And we all do. I think the best way to proceed, there is a response to your petition, your recommendations that we've worked hard on. And I've just asked Angie to send that to you so you'll have it. And what I propose, rather than, since all of us have read your recommendations and probably pondered them for a while, I think it'd be best to just go through point by point from the response to suggest how we want to deal with each of those, some of which you'll probably be pleased with and some of which you won't. But we can talk it through and just do it point by point. But before we start, I just want to make sure you've now gotten it and you can then ship it out to your group.
Did you say that you would be sending us the document? I didn't quite get that last sentence.
It just sent.
Okay,
It's just sent, so you should be getting it.
so that was sent to me, to my email?
Yes. Bye.
Okay. And for others that are perhaps in the meeting that would be interested in also following along that document, how might they obtain it?
If you just forward it to them, that'd be great, because I don't know that we have all their addresses.
Okay, I don't know, I don't know, of course, all the folks on the, I can't even see the number as to how many people are in the meeting.
Yeah, we'll cover it as we go through it, so they'll be able to hear the
Oh.
response.
Okay, so I will look for that.
Have you gotten?
I'm just looking now. Sometimes it takes a minute to come through. Yeah. Yep. There's a,
Can I give you a minute to send it to who you want to get it, so they can follow? I don't know who in your group is on. So
okay, I'm just sending it now.
Okay.
And perhaps some of those who've received it, if they know of others that are in the meeting, they could also send that on.
okay, well, with that, let's let Mason lead us all through it, and we'll stop at the, I think it's follows your organization into ABCDE. And so Mason, I'm going to ask you if you'll lead us through this, and hopefully we can move forward.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Bill, very much. As has been pointed out, the term conditional use permit has now been changed to special use permit because of the new chapter 160D, that becomes effective July 1, 2021, enacted by the legislature of the state of North Carolina. As some background, this particular new chapter in North Carolina law was many years in the making. Members of our P&Z, I know Alan and I attended the same seminar on this new law a year before it was actually passed. We attended it in the summer of 2019. It wasn't passed until June of 2020, but it's been in the works. Everybody sort of knew how it was going to come out, and it's so thorough that they wanted to get all the municipalities and other local governments versed in it, make sure everybody was able to get up to speed and have new ordinances that are in compliance in place by July 1, 2021.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Would you mind moving the microphone closer to your mouth? I'm getting messages that people can't hear you.
So to have new ordinances in place by July 1, 2021. The reason the state legislature passed Chapter 160D was very similar to the reason the town of Montreat has asked us to rewrite the zoning ordinance. All of the various portions of the North Carolina Code that addressed various development areas of the law had been adopted over various periods of time. There were inconsistencies. They were in different places. And the idea was to gather them all in one area, modernize it, make sure everything was consistent. That's what chapter 160D did. One of the things, the first request or recommendation that the Hayner Group in the memo they sent to us asked for or recommended was that the new zoning ordinance retain the required review and recommendation of the Planning and Zoning Commission before the Board of Adjustment can consider applications for special use permits. In other words, under the existing ordinance, the Planning and Zoning Commission has to recommend for approval a special or what's now called a conditional use permit before it can be heard by the Board of Zoning Board of Adjustment. Unfortunately, that's not permissible under new chapter 190, or rather 160D. 160D 705A provides that only one board among the various city boards can be empowered to grant or not grant special use permits. The city can select among either the Board of Adjustment, the Planning Board, or the Governing Board, which would be the Town Council itself. But only one of those boards can make that decision. That's just the way the law reads. And we can't change that. 160D will override and invalidate anything we try to do to the contrary. This conclusion is underscored by still another provision of 160D, 160D 301D6, which states that the Planning Board can still be involved in the process, but only to provide what they refer to in the statute as a preliminary form for review, and only on the condition that neither the recommendation or any part of that form can be used as a basis for the decision made by the Board of Zoning Adjustment. So that although a planning board can do a preliminary or forum, it's not an actual review, and any action it takes, and actually all the deliberations that occur basically have to be ignored by the Board of Zoning Adjustment. So you certainly can't say, as the Hayner memo asked us to continue to provide in our ordinance, that an approval by the Planning and Zoning Commission is a requirement or a prerequisite for an application for a special use permit to be heard by the Board of Zoning Adjustment. That's just not the case. Can't be, won't be. If we try to do it, it will be invalidated. We'll get sued, and the town will lose a lawsuit. So we're stuck with state law, and we have drafted this ordinance, the revised ordinance, to comply with state law. Now, as I just said, it still would be possible for the new revised ordinance to include a provision where the Planning and Zoning Commission would have a preliminary form, and where although whatever the Planning and Zoning Commission chose to do, and whatever anybody said at that uh, uh, preliminary forum would have to basically be ignored by the Board of Zoning Adjustment in its deliberation. Our policy decision is basically been that although that's still permissible, we don't recommend it, and simply because we believe that it's a waste of the time of the Planning and Zoning Commission. It would be a waste of the time of those people, both pro and con a particular special permit, to come up and make remarks and presentations that only have to be ignored 3 weeks or a month later when the Board of Zoning Adjustment addresses it. It just simply doesn't serve any really useful purpose from our perspective, and instead involves a significant amount of time on the part of the individual that's involved, as well as staff and other town resources, and an exercise that's essentially, not essentially, must be under Chapter 160D meaningless. Okay? It must be meaningless under state law. And so we see no reason to continue that procedure. There's also, frankly, a real issue as to whether or not you could use the looser non-judicial, non-quasi-judicial proceedings at that Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, which is part of what the Hayner memo would like, so that anybody can come up and say anything, whether it's relevant or evidence, or they have are involved in the dispute or not. That's permissible under the current procedures. I'm not sure, we're not sure whether that would be permissible under the new procedures. And I won't go into the details, but there are certain provisions of 160D which would at least strongly suggest that quasi-judicial procedures would even have to be followed in such an informal preliminary forum held by the Planning and Zoning Commission, so that the broader right for everybody to speak that people would like to see would not be available at that forum. And that's an issue that would need to be addressed by the town's council and advising the town council on that issue. But again, as a preliminary basis, we don't think whether it's a preliminary forum that allows everyone to speak or whether quasi-judicial procedures are involved. The fact that it is by law required to be meaningless, it seems to me, or to us anyway, the reason for it not to be utilized at all in the process. Because although the opponents of a special use permit may feel that an informal proceeding might help them in defeating that proceeding, the real truth is it's of no benefit. It's meaningless to them in that. The only way under current law, the only real opportunity for opponents of a special use permit to prevail in opposing a permit is to present competent, substantial, and material evidence that disproves or rebuts the evidence presented by the applicant at the hearing of the Board of Adjustment on that special permit, special use permit. That's it. That's the only way you can defeat a special use permit. And it seems to me that, it seems to us anyway, that that's where all the energies and opportunities of the parties should be focused. The second series,
Priscilla, I want to make sure y'all understood that, and the reasoning, which is pretty clear from the statute. But if you have any questions, you can ask.
Yeah, can you still hear me?
Speak a little
Yes.
louder.
Okay. Can you still hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, great. So if I could ask the Zoom coordinator, perhaps they could also allow Evan Williams and Brendan Hayner-Slattery to have their mics unmuted. And I would love to ask Evan particularly to come in as I know he gave considerable attention to this. Obviously, we did not receive, as everybody knows, we did not receive your memo in advance. So we are not able to actually look at the language that you're citing, which is unfortunate. So we may have to perhaps return to this in another meeting once we've had a chance to actually do that. But in the meantime, I know we have looked at the statute and we have access to it. So if Evan, if you are able to come in, and
I
then
don't see the name Ed.
While Evan is coming in, if I could say, if the speaker would kindly point the microphone down just a little bit and not move the head back and forth, because it's being cut out every time the direction of the voice is changed. So just point it down a little bit, because you're reading notes, and every time you look down to read notes, we can't hear. Number two, please don't refer to this as the Hayner Group. There's a lot of us who are property owners who are not associated with the Hayner Group whatsoever that are concerned about this. Thank you.
Who is speaking, please?
Bryant McIntyre, Georgia Terrace.
What group, what would you like us to refer to it to? We were doing.
Bill, it's property owners. It's concerned citizens. That's it. You know,
We're
it's
not property owners. And so we'll just say that they're opponents.
anyway, that's just, I just was.
We
finding
are
that-
responding to the Hayner memo.
Right. And a ton of people have emailed supporting the changes, whether they're affiliated with the Hayners or not.
Is Evan on?
I'll do my best to hold my head motionless, I guess.
If Evan is on the call, and oh, here we go. I see you now.
I
Hi,
think,
can you hear me? It's Evan.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Good morning, everybody. The only reason I'm a little disappointed that you can't see me is it's about 11 o'clock at night where I am, and I kept my tie on just so that I would look very official. So it's a shame that you all can't see me. But anyway, just briefly, in response to this first point, I mean, I read quickly through the response. Obviously, as Priscilla said, it's the first time we're seeing it, but you know, it's a careful and substantive response, and so I don't have any particular bone to pick with anything that's been said. I just have to, what I have to do is just take a closer look at the statutory provisions that were cited in the response. But you know, it's a careful, thoughtful response on this point, and we appreciate it.
Thank you, Evan. Yes, Alan.
Yeah, just, okay, yes, sorry. In reference to the section we've just covered here, in response to the Hayner letter, is a special use permit even being considered for what is proposed by the Mountain Retreat Association?
No, all we're doing is we're voting on changes to the zoning.
Okay, very good. I just want to make sure that was clarified, not just for us, but for others throughout.
No application's been filed. We're not doing anything as it relates to them. Okay, Mason, would you go on to number B, or letter B?
Yes, thank you.
Sorry, I do have one more question before we move on.
Who's this?
This is Brendan Hayner Slattery, one of the writers of the memo.
Okay.
So I'm specifically looking at the section of the statute that you say prevents the planning board from serving the role it did in the previous ordinance. And it talks about the ability of them to serve, this is 160D 3016, to serve as a preliminary forum, but it specifically says that the roles it can serve may include, but shall not be limited to, the following. So I'm curious where you're seeing a restriction that it can't serve any roles beyond the one specifically listed there.
You're going to need to point me, please, to the section in 160D you're referring to.
Right, yeah, so in your response, you cite section 160D 3016.
It says,
and it says
the planning board may be assigned the duty to provide a preliminary forum for review of quasi-judicial decisions, provided that no part of the forum or recommendation may be used as a basis by the deciding board.
Right, and it says that the planning board may be assigned these duties, but is there anything restricting it to no other duties? It seems
Where are you
pretty
getting
consistent in this.
maybe assign other duties?
Well, it says the planning board may be assigned duties.
Where is that?
6. That would be under duties at the header above that section B. From my understanding of the restrictions that laid out, it distinguished between requirements, which would be saying it must be assigned the following duties versus open-ended
What that's
allowances.
referring to, is, again, this is a general statute regard. It's referring to other duties such as reviewing the stormwater ordinance. And in fact, the town council has asked the Planning and Zoning Commission to review the stormwater ordinance. But that's not saying it can, but it's strictly limiting what the Planning and Zoning Commission can do in the context of a quasi-judicial hearing. At least that's the way I read it, and certainly other folks can reach a different conclusion, but I'm fairly certain reasonably certain my conclusion is correct.
Yeah, and the important thing is that the Board of Adjustment can't consider anything, can't consider any of the testimony, can't consider any of the exhibits, can't consider the recommendation. They got to start all over. So it seems like the Planning Commission's role is just a waste of everybody's time on both sides. Okay, Mason, would you continue?
I'm sorry,
Yes.
I don't know if,
First, we don't believe, and we appreciate the remarks that Priscilla made. That certainly wasn't the intention or belief that in the adoption, producing the revised provisions of the zoning ordinance with regard to special use permits, that we weakened any protections on the part of the public. We, as I just explained, though, understandably did make a change in the public process itself by eliminating the Planning and Zoning Commission's participation. We did that, as I've explained, because state law makes that participation, from our perspective, a waste of town resources. We also made changes in the conditions that were required to be found as a prerequisite of a special use permit. In our perspective, from a substantive standpoint, there was no weakening of the public protections. And in fact, in many cases, there were what we considered strengthening of public protections. In fact, under the old ordinance, no findings were required by the Board of Zoning Adjustment. The only findings required to be made were required to be found by the Planning and Zoning Commission, which was an advisory board only. Technically, the ordinance didn't require the Planning and Zoning Committee, rather the Board of Zoning Adjustment, to make any specific findings with regard to the application. The revised ordinance makes it clear that all of the required findings that we list must be found by the Board of Zoning Adjustment as a prerequisite for a special use permit. We also included in the revised ordinance some additional findings that were not in the prior ordinance. But we recognize that there were some words dropped or substituted that have given angst to the opponents, as well as the Hayner Group and other opponents. I hope that's correct. And we want to, and again, our purpose here is not to be adversary, but conciliatory and reach agreement. And so we recommended a number of changes in our new sections 310.621 through 310.626, which we believe makes the findings that the new findings that are required to be made by the Board of Zoning Adjustment. And again, under the prior ordinance, no findings were required to be made by the Board of Zoning Adjustment. But all of these findings to include all of the substantive provisions and words that people feel were not as strong as prior words that were in the old ordinance. and I'll go through them. For example, in 310.621, instead of materially harm with respect to the public health, safety, and welfare, we're going to recommend that we put back in the words be detrimental to or endanger.
That comes from the existing ordinance.
That comes from the existing ordinance. So we're in section 3.622 is by way of explanation. There were several standards under the prior ordinance which related to specific provisions that were covered by municipal standard municipal development standards and conditions. We included a much broader revision finding that we imposed the burden on the applicant of making that basically said the project would meet all of the development standards and conditions contained in the various town ordinances. And so what we've done is in that much broader required finding, we've added language to make sure that everything included in all the words that were included in the prior required findings are included. We say including without limitation all development standards, conditions, and requirements related to utilities, parking, access, and stormwater drainage, and the applicable regulations of the zoning district in which it is located. This is language, again, straight out of the old standards to make sure these same words are in the new standards. With respect to section 310.623, instead of the word injure the value of properties, we've inserted the words diminished and impair, the same words that were in the prior ordinance. So that, again, we've got, although we're not sure there's any difference between injure and diminish and repair, we're going to use the same word so that it's clear there is no difference. In addition, we had included adjoining or adjacent parcels as opposed to neighborhood. We've inserted different language that broadens adjoining or adjacent parcels. We put any property or portion of which is located within 200 feet of the boundary of the parcel, which is 250 feet of the boundary of the parcel in which the use will be located. We felt like the word neighborhood was too general. We're not sure what a neighborhood is in Montreat. It's almost one big neighborhood. The burden is on the parties to say, how far out do we have to go and prove that there's no impact on values. 250 feet was the standard used in the ordinance for providing notice to adjoining landowners of the hearing. So we felt like that was an appropriate distance to also use in defining what in effect constitutes a neighborhood and how far out the applicant had to go in proving property values. Town council may make that distance smaller or greater, but we attempted to replicate the essence of the wording in the prior or the existing conditions. With respect to section 310.624, we've added language that was in the prior conditions, the words and will not be injurious to the use and enjoyment of other property within the area within which it is located. We felt that concern was covered by other broader language we have, but we have, again, like all of these, we have no problem putting it back in to make sure the exact same words are replicated in both the existing and the prior ordinance. Likewise, we've included a new section 310.626, which I can say is the only thing we went through in great detail to make sure we thought everything was covered. But the one thing frankly, that wasn't covered in the new language, we felt one way or the other that was in the prior language, which was language that required that adequate measures have been taken or will be taken to provide ingress and egress so designed as to minimize congestion in the public streets. We had thought that was covered in existing town regulations, but we got with the town staff and we're able to confirm that no, that was not required under the regulations. So although we thought it would be covered by our broad provision, it was not, and we've added it there. So the only, we think we have addressed most of the requests that have been made by the Hayner Group. There's one provision I'll mention, and that we didn't fix it the way that was suggested, and that was frankly a rather unusual finding in the existing ordinance, which basically has language that says, and I'll read it. It says, and it's going to be hard for me to keep my head still, but I'm going to.
Where are you reading from?
This is from 801.4 of the existing ordinance. It says the exterior architectural appeal and functional plan, whatever that is, of any proposed structure will not be so at variance with the existing architectural appeal and functional plan of the structures already constructed on or in the course of construction in the immediate neighborhood, you understand that, or with the character of the applicable district as to, quote, cause a substantial depreciation in the property values within the neighborhood. Well, our conclusion is that's going back to the property. All of that is going back to property values, okay? And that there's no substantial depreciation in property values. We believe that's redundant. That if there's concern about architectural design and structure, that's covered by our provision, which requires that the location and character of the use will be in harmony with the area in which it is located. So architectural harmony is actually not covered in the existing ordinance. It is covered in our conditions. And this provision, which simply goes to value, is redundant, and we feel is covered by 310.62. So
Since we've already included
that's what.
diminishment.
So substantial impairment of values is already dealt with, and that's really all this provision at bottom does. And so we believe that these changes, which we hope to recommend, will be satisfactory. We're confident that they make it absolutely clear that even though we don't think there was any impairment of the public's protection, that clearly now there's all the words are in there that people feel are important and that are vital to there being no change in the substance of the existing ordinance and the current ordinance as to the standards an applicant must meet, standards approved an applicant must meet and show in order to be entitled for a permit. And again, I'll say our standards are applicable to the planning and zoning, rather the zoning board of zoning adjustment, which the current ordinance does not make them applicable to the board of zoning adjustment. The last
On this same chapter,
I'm done with this thing.
So I think what I hope y'all heard was that we made virtually every change that y'all recommended under section B, going back to the language in the existing ordinance, except in the one case that Mason alluded to. So any comments from the opposition group?
This is Priscilla. Can you hear me? Am I unmuted? If I speak
Can
loudly?
you go close to your microphone if you can.
Sure, I'm about as close as I can be, but I can be. One question, first of all, thank you very much. I'm sorry, I didn't catch the name of the person who's been presenting.
His name is Mason Blake.
Nason Blake. Thank you, Mr. Blake. It's nice to know who we're speaking with. One question, first of all, thank you very much. You did incorporate much of the language that we recommended, and Evan and Brendan will surely want to come in. They gave a lot of close thought to this. The one question I have, because when I was looking at the guidance for the North Carolina statute, one note that was made is try to not use language that's not very clear. And the specific example they gave were words such as substantial or significant, which of course can't always be avoided. But in your mind, is there a difference between substantial diminishment of property or the value of property, or just diminishing or impairing the value of property? So that I can imagine there might be a debate in the future as to, well, is that substantial enough?
Well, we understood that what your group wanted was the rules to be the same. That's what we tried to do. I do think there's a definite difference between a substantial impairment of value and impairment of value.
Any dimension.
I don't see how you cannot think, frankly, that the word substantial, if you failed to put that in there, would be changing the rules. And that's not what we're here to do or asked to do. We're try to make the rules more user-friendly, try to make do away with the inconsistencies, try to make this ordinance simpler where we could. But we were not asked when this commission was asked to review this ordinance was to materially change the rules.
And we trust that we have, as to section B, reflected changes that were virtually identical to what y'all requested.
I will say this, they asked for substantially to be deleted in their specific, but I didn't because that word was in the original ordinance, which is the words that presumably we wanted to include to make sure there was no change.
Any other questions before we move on to C?
Brendan or Evan in particular, did you have any other reactions?
I don't have any reactions on this section. I think a lot of these changes are perfectly responsive to the issues we raised. So thank you.
Thank you for raising. I think this improves it. Okay, Mason, would you go on to C?
We do too. As Bill said, we think this improves it. We appreciate your input. We don't want any perception to be out there that we weren't trying to do our job and be fair as we can be. And that also goes to those third group of changes which all talked about, which was the shifting of burden. And again, I'll say, I'm not sure, I don't believe there was an actual shift of burden, but I'll be the first one to admit that, and we needed several provisions that were reworded that were perhaps just structured in the wrong way, and we've done that. I don't think that at the end of the day there's any change, but I'm glad we made these changes, and I'm glad you brought them to our attention. The first change we've made is to the objectives and purposes. Again, the language that was in there was proposed by the staff, and we didn't have any real problem with it. But and I know your changes, but what we've decided to do to, again, go back to making sure nobody feels we changed any rules here or con anybody, is to go back to the original objective and purposes language that was set forth in section 800 of the existing ordinance. And so we've just simply changed 310.61 of our ordinance to read essentially the same as the existing ordinance, which is very matter of fact, that the purpose is to ensure there's adequate review and control of the issues of special use permits, etc. That's it. That's what the purpose is. This isn't an operative provision per se anyway, but we wanted to make sure that it was matter of fact. That's what we're doing. With respect to the burden of proof, we don't think there was an actual change of burden of proof, but I sure would be the first to admit that the way it was worded was in a couple of places, it appears a sentence was dropped and it was confusing. And in a couple of places, just the way it was worded made things look like they were somewhat favoring the applicant, and they weren't intended to be that way. And so we've changed the wording of 310.634, 635, and 636 fairly substantially. Again, more matter of factly, 310.634 now reads, the Board of Adjustment shall only approve the requested application if it concludes, based upon the information submitted at the hearing, that 1, the requested permit is within its jurisdiction to grant, according to the table of permitted uses. 2, the application for the permit is complete. And 3, if completed as proposed in the application, the development will comply with all the requirements of this ordinance. Real simple. Everything's in. jurisdiction, permit, application's complete, and they've complied with everything. 310.635 is now revised to read as follows. Even if the Board of Adjustment finds that the application complies with all other provisions of this ordinance, it shall deny the permit if it is unable to make all of the findings required in section 310.62, based upon a preponderance of the evidence submitted at the hearing. I don't think we can get any simpler than that.
And I think y'all wanted to restate 31062, but we felt like that was unnecessary.
Yeah, just there's no reason to recite them in there when all we had to say is again, putting it in the negative to make it more of a burden, at least in tenor on the applicant that it's a required denial unless they've made all the required findings are able to be made based on all of the submissions. And lastly, we revised 636, and this is where the language in the draft that got to the commission had some words missing, and I'm not sure how we missed it in sending it to the commission, but forgive us. It was 100 pages of a lot of stuff. This wasn't on the top of our agenda when we were submitting it, frankly, because we didn't know this would be a controversial subject. But in any event, 310.636 does lay out what the burden of persuasion or proof is. The prior ordinance, candidly, the existing ordinance does not. We think it's helpful if it does. We think it's helpful for the proponents and opponents. Everybody knows what the rule of the game is. Frankly, 636 just tells it like it is. If we don't have 636 in here, it still applies, guys. It's a quasi-judicial hearing, and these are the way quasi-judicial hearings work. And it's better if everybody that's a citizen that's involved in one of a special permit application knows just what's going to happen. So here's the way it reads. The burden of presenting a complete application to the Board of Adjustment shall be upon the applicant. However, unless the board informs the applicant at the hearing in what way the application is incomplete and offers the applicant an opportunity to complete the application, either at the meeting or a continuation hearing, the application shall be presumed to be complete. Once a complete, so the applicant's got the burden of putting in a complete application, and if it's not, somebody's got to tell them why and give them the opportunity to fix it. Then, once that's been submitted, the applicant shall have the burden to present competent, substantial, and material evidence that would support findings by the Board of Adjustment in accordance with the requirements of section 310.62. That is, the applicant has the burden to make a prima facie case sufficient to support the required findings. And that demonstrates the applicant has otherwise complied with all the requirements of this ordinance applicable to the requested special use permit. So that's it. The applicant has got to put on facts that prove he meets all the required, proves all the required findings that are set forth in the ordinance. And then once he does that and otherwise complies and shows he's complied, he or she has complied with all the provisions. He's met his burden. Upon such a showing by the applicant, the statute goes on to say, the section goes on to say, those parties opposed to granting the special use permit shall have the burden of presenting competent, substantial, and material evidence that disproves or rebuts the evidence or information presented by the applicant. That's what the opponents are going to have to do. That's the only way they prevail. Once the applicant meets his burden of proof, if no contrary proof is permitted or shown by those opposing, obviously the Board of Adjustment is the trier of facts, is going to weigh the evidence. Applicants met his burden. Opponents have provided no evidence. The preponderance of the evidence is in favor of the permit. So that's just the way it works. It works that way in every civil trial.
Every civil trial, but also if the opponents do present competent, substantial evidence, then the board makes the decision based, just like any other civil proceeding, on a preponderance of the evidence. They've got to weigh the evidence and they make a decision based on the preponderance.
So that's, Bill, that's it on that subject, and then we can move on to the other things, but
On the weight of the evidence and the burden, that really is a more lawyerly thing. So I'm wondering if Evan wants to say anything about that, or anybody else, but this is no different from any other civil proceeding.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, no, I'm following what you're saying. It makes sense. I think, it's very good that you did change, the wording in, sorry, I'm just scrolling down to it, 310-634, I'm sorry, 310-635, to say that if the Board of Adjustment doesn't make the findings which are set out above, that it shall deny the permit. It was concerning to us that the previous draft seemed to indicate that the Board of Adjustment would have the option. Even I know the language was mandatory above, but in 310-635 it wasn't. So the fact that you address that is a big thing. Obviously, you know, we would like you know, the burden to remain on the applicant, but I understand what you're saying, and you know, I've certainly learned some things tonight about the way that the hearings have to run. So again, we're grateful to you for making that change in 310-635.
Thank you, Evan. If you, being a lawyer, I'm sure you realize that it's just like any other case. If you sue somebody for running into your car, you've got the burden of proof that the person ran into your car. But that person can say, as an affirmative defense, well, I ran into his car, but he was drunk and he pulled over on my side of the road. And he has the burden of showing that. So it's the same, this is the same thing. Whoever presents a defense for a counterclaim has got the burden on that. And we thought that's what it said anyway, but this makes it more clear.
And then,
No.
and I'll let Dr. Curry. I didn't like the wording of that either. Once I reread it, I understand why you guys didn't like it. We are happy to reword it. Appreciate your comments. The next is the three areas that they also wanted to address. The first of which was conflicts of interest. Our thought was that 190D-109 was self-operative, and that the ordinance, it wasn't required to be incorporated in the ordinance.
Was not in the earlier.
Wasn't in the earlier ordinance. And the School of Government publication indicated that it also indicated self-operative, but we are happy, and it just didn't come up. We're happy to add two provisions, even though it's applicable anyway, to again make it clear so everybody knows that they are in fact applicable. And so we're adding two sentences, one at the end of 308, which says that all members of the Planning Commission shall comply with 160D-109 and any other applicable conflict of interest laws and requirements of the state, and a similar provision to section 310.3, which requires all members of the Board of Zoning Adjustment to comply with 160D-109 in all applicable conflicts. So we don't think it's necessary and don't recommend that we recite 190D-109 twice in this, once or twice in this ordinance. It's just, from our perspective, not necessary. Frankly, this would incorporate, by just referencing the statute, any changes to the state from time to time to that statute that it feels like it need to be made with conflict of interest regulation. Bill?
Questions? Again, we think we did what you wanted. We just didn't rewrite it. But we think this accomplishes the same thing.
Thank you so much. I'll come in briefly, and perhaps somebody else also is trying to come in. It is absolutely correct. That is an option, as I think I indicated earlier, to make reference to rather than incorporate all of the of that article. Our view is that people, the public, and any officials, administrative staff, and others would find it more accessible if it were incorporated in whole, that page that we attached. That's why we recommended that approach. Legally, it's the same thing. I absolutely accept that. But for ease of use and implementation, it seems it would be, in our view, it would be preferable to just have it there in black and white. The other question I had is, when I read that article, it makes references repeatedly to zoning amendments. In your view, is a special use permit application process, is that a zoning amendment? Because it seems logical that a special use permit application process, anyone involved in that would also have to be aligned with conflict of interest restrictions, but it doesn't actually say that. I'm actually surprised by the way it's written, but I had suggested that we add that sentence to make that clear.
Priscilla, a special use permit is not a zone. Let me take a look at 109. Bill's giving me some bigger type. Really good. If you go down to D, quasi-judicial decisions, a member of any board exercising quasi-judicial functions, that's what a special use permit is, pursuant to this chapter, shall not participate in or vote on any quasi-judicial matter, which is what a special use permit is, in a manner which would violate affected person's constitutional rights to an impartial decision. So it does apply. It's different than A, which does refer to legislative decisions and zoning changes, which this is not. Special use permit is different. But I believe, again, without reading this, going to this quickly, that subsection D of 160D-109 does cover special use permits.
And the other reason to refer to the statute rather than repeat it would be, as Mason pointed out, if the legislature amends it, then it would automatically follow. If we had an outdated statement in the zoning ordinance, we'd have to be watching out every year to make sure that we follow all the amendments if any by the state. So this seems to keep it in accord with what the state wants its public servants to follow.
Yeah, I'd point out the town's general code of ordinances does not include in it the state's conflict of interest requirements with regard to the city town officials. They're in the overall state ordinance, and they're not incorporated by reference in the town's general code of ordinances.
Thank you very much.
May I also ask a question? This is Kate Hayner.
Sure.
And I'm sorry, I was not unmuted before, so I'm going to go back to 310.623, where the, I'll let you pull that up.
What section is this under?
This, under the special use permit, weakening and eliminating protections, under that.
310.63.
Yes, and this is where, Mr. Blake, you had mentioned that you wanted to keep the word substantially, as far as substantially diminish and impair the property value.
What we said, yes, we left substantially in there because it's in the existing ordinance.
Correct. And so my question is, and my understanding was this was one of the purposes of updating the zoning ordinance was to clarify. And I don't see that as a term that would be clear to everybody reading it as to what substantially is. So my question is, if you were to keep that word in there, if you can quantify what substantially is, so that it's not a subjective term.
Well, this board can do what it wants. My recommendation is to leave it as, I don't think what is, I don't, it is, and 190D recognizes that there is some subjectivity in special use permit decisions. Substantially, diminish is subjective. Impair is subjective. But I do know this, there's a difference between diminish and impair and substantially diminishing. And I, for one, was trying in what the changes we've made in response to the Hayner memo was to make it clear that we were not changing the rules of the required findings. To delete the word substantially, or to say plus or minus 20% or 25% or whatever, would be changing the rules.
I also had the same question. Can you hear me? This is Bryant McIntyre coming back in.
Yes, I can.
Yeah, you've done an admirable job of keeping your head still. Thank you so much. We can hear better.
Thank you, Brian.
We've got lots of
now.
We've got lots of elderly here trying to listen in. Thank you so much. I know it's not easy speaking to a remote group. I just want to say the same thing jumped off with me about the substantially. Going back to Bill's analogy about a car, if somebody runs a key down the edge of your car and you're driving a Ferrari, that's substantial. And a lot of people's homes in Montreat are that Ferrari. So it shouldn't be injurious at all. That's why I also agree with her that substantial should be taken out. That was why you were looking at the ordinance to begin with. I think I agree with her 100%. And I also want to say that we're all on the same page here. We've been referred to as the opposition a lot in speaking there, and I'm not opposed. I think this is a fantastic undertaking you've done and appreciate your work tremendously, but it's been referenced that way quite a bit. And I just want to point out one other thing, and I'm probably muddying the waters here, but I did look in the last minutes and there was a fallback issue and it was going, and I think this makes great sense. Take the two houses on each side of the proposed building and let's average their fallback and let's, show some flexibility in that fallback. Can we do the same thing with the size of buildings? Because we've got a pink elephant in the room. It's coming down the pipe of a 33,000 square foot building getting ready to be built in Collegiate Circle. Why don't you take the average of the building size in that neighborhood and let's go, okay, there's your limit. You can't go any bigger than that. It makes sense to me.
Well, that's a different part of the ordinance than we've been looking at. There are size limitations on structures. Frankly, we've not looked at that in the context of what's going on right now with proposals. So it's hard for me to respond just off the top of my head.
I was just going to say too, that the size is covered elsewhere, as Mason alluded to. And that came up in the specific context of setback lines. So I don't think that we thought it would be useful to do that. In fact, it really never came up. I'd like to go back to the use of the word substantial. And you alluded to the Ferrari, but you've got, if you take out substantially, then you've got $1 difference. And surely I can find $1 that will diminish your property value because you're going to take up some bushes or something. So either the word substantially or materially need to be in there because it's got to be something that is something. It just can't be. It can't be just a.
This is Kate again. And I just wanted to, I would assume that one would need an appraisal on their property to demonstrate that there's any diminished value. And not just simply saying there's a bush here and now it diminishes my property by $5. So there's clearly a formal record that needs to be accounted for.
Yes, that's right. And actually what happens at the hearing is just that this is a quasi-judicial hearing. If you haven't been there, if you haven't been to one of these, you need to know. Here's what happens. The applicant's going to call a property appraiser, and he's going to get up, and whoever's representing the applicant is going to qualify that property appraiser as an expert witness. Okay, and then once he's qualified as an expert witness, They're going to ask the property appraiser what they've done to analyze property values and impact on property values. And the appraiser is going to testify that he's did A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. And then they're going to ask for an expert opinion based on his experience and expertise and the work he's done as to whether or not there's been a substantial impact on the property values or not. And he's going to answer that question and give that testimony. That's the way a quasi-judicial hearing works. I can't change that. That's the way this works.
You know, and on the other hand, the opponents would then put on their expert.
Absolutely.
And then the Board of Adjustment would make a decision based on what it views the preponderance of the evidence was.
This is Robert Warner, if I might speak. Robert Warner, I'm at 346 Chapman Road. I'm up on the hill there, and directly across from me is institutional zoning. I appreciate that this meeting is only looking at zoning as a general issue. There are no applications before the town council right now, no formal applications. But looking at it as a purely theoretical matter, if across the street from me, a developer were to build a 33,000 square foot hotel and conference center and remove all the trees and allow parking for 60, I would suggest that it's rather clear that that would substantially diminish my property value as regards the traffic and noise in the area. So I just wanted to put that out as a purely theoretical. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Okay, let's go on to the next section, which is
Yes, preservation of character of Montreat or reference to historic preservation. Historic preservation is different from zoning. The law is different from zoning. It is covered in 190B. If you want to get into the historic preservation business, the town needs to adopt an historic preservation ordinance. It needs to create an historic preservation committee. That's the way it works. It's not part of zoning. We understand that, you know, the comprehensive plan makes reference to historic preservation and its values. We have in our ordinance included in section 310.625 that the applicant must prove that the proposed use is in general conformity with the comprehensive plan and all of the other policies and plans.
that's in it as written now. That's not an addition.
That's right. That's not an addition. That's the way we've got it. There was no such requirement in the prior ordinance. Again, we've also included a provision which requires harmony with the area architectural and other harmony with the area. Doesn't say architectural, but harmony with the area. So harmony is required, but historic preservation isn't a zoning issue. When you get into historic preservation, you don't pick out, I mean, you've got to get into historic districts and you've got to get into historic structures which are prohibited from being demolished or altered in certain ways. Those are a whole certain sets of rights that are different from zoning. There's a whole, again, different set of laws. And again, 190D has a whole separate set of ordinances that it lays out. So although we appreciate your concern with historic preservation, and we've addressed it the best we can do by including in 310.625 a requirement for conformity with the comprehensive plan, that's as far as we are able to go. There certainly is nothing about historic preservation in the current zoning ordinance. There's a reason. It's just supposed to be in a different place.
And so if y'all would like the town council to consider historic preservation more certainly, then y'all would certainly have the right to ask the town council to do so, and then they would appoint, they would proceed as they thought possible.
And the same thing is true with the environmental protections noted in
Let's go to F now.
These are all covered in the Code of General Ordinances of the town. There's a whole chapter K There's Article 1, which deals with flood drainage provision ordinance. Article 2, soil erosion and sedimentation ordinance. Article 3, stormwater management. Article 4, here's hillside development. Article 5, trees. These are all dealt with. Our provision in section 6, or rather 310.622 requires the applicant to provide assurances that all the requirements and conditions in these ordinances are going to be complied with. That's the best we can do from a zoning perspective. Dealing with specific environmental protections is outside of the zoning area, and it is covered elsewhere in the code. So again, the requirement that all of these provisions be complied with was not and is not in the existing ordinance. It's not. The new revised ordinance we're proposing does make compliance part of a required showing. So again, I'll underscore, there was never any intent on making this easier on an applicant. Our goal was to make the applicant's responsibility comprehensive, improving his or her entitlement to it.
And I'll just read 310.622 as it's stated now, that the use meets all the required and applicable development standards and conditions. And that would apply to any standards and conditions. So any questions about this part?
Yes. This is Brendan Hayner Slattery. So I'm curious when you say that it's not a zoning issue, because the reason I made this connection here was because the text establishing the maximum distribution and maximum impervious land area requirements that the comprehensive plan recommended be adopted was directly referenced as this section in the Buncombe County zoning ordinance. So to say it's not a zoning issue seems a little bit not to reflect at least how Buncombe County was classifying this. And you referenced the stormwater management and hillside development ordinances, but I noticed that those have both been revised twice since this recommendation was made by the comprehensive plan to put in more protections for slopes under 25%. And it doesn't seem like they've added that. In fact, the hillside development doesn't do anything at all for slopes under 40%. So I guess I'm just curious as to why it's thought that this isn't something that zoning would need to take part in addressing.
Well, let me just say, and I appreciate that, but we are also charged by the town council to take a look at the stormwater ordinances and the hillside development ordinances. But given the July 1st deadline on the zoning ordinance, we decided to postpone that until we were through with this. But I will assure you that the stormwater ordinance and the hillside development ordinance are on our agenda as soon as this gets done. One of our members, Mr. Burns, will be particularly appreciative of that. So that's where we are on that.
And regardless of anybody building anything in Montreat, whether it's subject to any sort of special use permit or otherwise, is going to have to comply in whatever they do from a development perspective in complying with the revised stormwater order.
So thank you for that. Any other questions?
I don't have a question. This is Kate Hayner, but I just wanted to put something on the record that I'm going back to the use of the word substantial in the prior, let me pull that up. In 310.623 is would not substantially diminish or impair value of any property. And I just wanted to put on record that North Carolina law does not require the use of substantial diminishment of property value to have a standing to challenge the issuance of a special use law, only a diminished value.
So noted. Standing is different than the of an applicant to challenge a law is different from the requirements of the law itself.
Okay, thank you. And I
wanted to comment if you can still hear me. This is Priscilla Hayner. Can you still hear me?
Yep.
So just in terms of the last two sections on preservation and on environment, Mr. Blake, I hear, of course, what you're saying. but I'm not persuaded because I see that it's not required to include specifically these references, but I don't see how it would not be allowed. And in the context of Montreat, where those were the two areas, especially the preservation point was by far the top concern in the comprehensive plan and in the process and surveying of residents leading to the comprehensive plan. So it seems to me that rather than a passing reference to that plan, there would be no reason, and it would be a positive contribution to make specific reference and intention to preserve the built environment, to give, I mean, you can't in advance preserve every structure, but to give prominence to that as a priority and to give prominence to environmental concerns, including, in addition to what Brendan outlined, the requirement to do an impact study on the environmental effects of any considerable new construction. So yes, I see that you're not required. Yes, it would be a change from this old ordinance. I think that's clearly, both of those would be positive changes and in line with the commitment in the new ordinance proposal to specifically implement the comprehensive plan.
Well, Priscilla, thank you, and I understand, and I guess because I'm a lawyer, you probably, I know we lawyers think strange words, but I can tell you that 160D is not going to let you do that. Historic preservation's got to be covered. You can make some passing, ineffective references if you like, but they're not going to change the way the law works, and that's historic preservation is going to have to be dealt with in the context of historic preservation law, which has a whole set of different requirements and is applied in an entirely different way than you implement zoning regulations. Let me make this clear, and I want, and I just say this because it's the law. A special use permit, that's what we're dealing with. I know that's what y'all are concerned about. I appreciate it. But here's the way a special use permit works. It's in a quasi-judicial hearing. A person who comes to the quasi-judicial hearing and makes the proofs that the ordinance requires and meets his burden is entitled to that special use permit if he or she otherwise does everything that's required by the ordinance, unless those opposing the application rebut or disprove that burden. So that it's like a trial. It's a finding of fact. And you may have one appraiser says one thing, one appraiser says another. It's like a trial. It's not, a special use permit is not a venue through which you impose development requirements, that this has to be this size or that has to be that size. That's done in other laws and regulations. And you may want it there, but that's not where you put it. It's got to be so that it's of general application. You just can't say that to get a special use permit, the house has got to be, you can't get a special use permit if the house is over 100 years old. No, you have to have a historic preservation permit that applies throughout the town, that anybody, anywhere, whether they need any kind of permit, can't do anything to the house if it's 100 years old or not. That's the way it works. And that's what's fair. You can't sort of pick out how, let's put some stuff in here for special permits or for rezonings that's not applicable across the town to everybody who needs whatever permit or in town, no matter where they're located and in what circumstance.
And so I would once again encourage you to speak with members of the council to see if they would be willing to consider a comprehensive look at the historic preservation.
Could I just clarify? I do realize we are coming short on time, but could I just clarify that the recommendations therein, especially on the preservation point, didn't pertain specifically to special use permits only. In fact, it pertained to adding a sentence in the general provisions Article 106 to clarify that pertaining to any alterations, constructions, et cetera, in Montreat, that it would be in keeping with the comprehensive plan and specifically historic structures. So I totally agree with you, Mr. Blake, that it shouldn't be specific just to special use permits because it will apply to many other kinds of zoning decisions. So on that, yes, I agree in principle. I don't agree in conclusion.
Right. Well, thank you. And again, I would encourage you to speak with your members of the council. I think we're ready to.
One more brief comment, if I could, on the issue of the role of the planning commission.
What now?
Well, sorry, if I could make one more brief comment on the issue of the role of the planning commission that was discussed.
Yes.
So you seem to express an interpretation that this designation of what role the planning commission could serve was sort of an exhaustive list, a constraint on what it could do. I've gotten a chance to read that section more thoroughly, and I just noticed that the line directly below the one cited said that the planning commission can be designated to perform any other related duties that the governing board may direct. So I guess I'm just a little curious why the impression seems to be that their hands are tied in what role the planning commission can serve in this process. So I just wanted to make that note.
Sure, thank you. And I think Mason dealt with that, but
Yeah.
those are the other.
Let me just say once again, that refers to things other than the quasi-judicial process, such as reviewing the stormwater ordinance or something like that. The limitations in preceding clause 6 are applicable, period, to non-quasi-judicial, rather quasi-judicial function.
Yeah, keep in mind, this is not some nice hearing that everybody comes and just says whatever they want to do. This is a quasi-judicial hearing. It is like a trial. And that's very important to remember.
So for purposes of clarification, can you agree? Because I had thought you said earlier that the Board of Adjustment could, if it wanted to, open itself to the public. I'm not sure if that was stated, but I had understood somebody to suggest that. But it seems, as you've been repeating, as a quasi-judicial proceeding under the Board of Adjustment, we are now saying that there will be no public input into a special use permit, even in cases where certainly a special use permit application would affect the town as a whole. Only the people within 250 feet would have standing to come before the Board of Adjustment in this, as you say, very much a quasi-judicial proceeding. It takes out the public from the discussion. And you're saying there's no possible way around that by the way that you read it?
Look, the chairman, and I'm not speaking for the commission here. I'm not speaking for the town. I can speak from what I've seen. It may be that the chairman of the commission allows a brief time, but I would say brief time for public comment before the hearing starts in earnest. He or she may not. It's like a trial, and it's just that way. In a trial, anybody can't get up and say anything they want, that they're not qualified to testify. They just can't say their opinion. That's not the way a hearing, an evidentiary hearing works. And that's really what this Board of Adjustment meeting is. That's why they call it quasi-judicial.
The statute is very specific about that.
And we didn't make that up. It's a state law. And 190 didn't make it up. The courts before then, in the case law of North Carolina and states throughout the United States, have always held that these hearings are, not always, but in most states, have held these are quasi-judicial.
May I ask a clarifying question, Mr. Blake?
Yes.
This is Kate Hayner. Is it your understanding, as I am hearing it, is that if a new structure were to be to go up in Montreat under that no input is allowed at any level at Montreat by the citizens of Montreat, because apparently the town council is not able to discuss this, and it's not to be discussed with the zoning commission. So I'm just wondering what your understanding is, if there is an ability for any kind of input from those that live in Montreat.
Well, the ability, again, the town council will have the option. We don't think it's a good option, but and it's not in our recommendations, to continue to have the Planning and Zoning Commission, okay, have a preliminary forum, and that's what they call it. It's a preliminary forum for review. They don't even say for making a determination. Preliminary forum for review, but it says that can't be binding, that can't be used by the decision-making body on the decision.
And
So
it can be referred.
so yeah, you can, but you can walk outside and holler in the night. It's about that much use. I mean, you could talk to the planning commission, but the planning commission isn't going to make the decision, and it can't be evidence to the Board of Adjustment when it makes the decision. So I'm sorry, if that's the way the system is set up, and
that's set up by the state.
by the state.
I have this is Ann Hayner. I have a question relating exactly to that point. This goes back to sort of the premise that you started with, that I would like a little more clarification of. You said that the zoning ordinance, the new zoning ordinance says that the governing body of the town may decide if the Board of Adjustment, Planning Board, or the governing body decides on special use permits, any of those three.
That's the statute.
That's what the statute requires, that only one of those would make the decision. Did you all consider, I mean, one of the questions is, why did you recommend that the Board of Adjustment be the one that makes these decisions? For example, why would the town council, which has elected members and would be open to public comment, why would they not be the ones, for example, that would make the decision on special use permits? Or why would the planning
That's
commission?
their prerogative. They can decide.
That's a good question, but I can give you the reason why we've just simply not changed it. But there's a reason that typically, and I'm sure the existing ordinance, as well as the ordinance we're recommending, it puts it under the aegis of the Board of Adjustment. The Board of Adjustment in North Carolina, in most states, has a specialized role. It's why it's a special board. They make quasi-judicial decisions, okay? Another type of quasi-judicial decision is variances. Actually, 190D doesn't even allow the council, 160D requires variances to be held by the Board of Zoning Adjustment. They actually go to seminars that the state puts on, that school them on, here's how you handle these hearings, so that it's a special kind of decision. It's not done a lot. And the Board of Adjustment is given that responsibility because they have training, expertise, and experience in making the quasi-judicial decision. That's frankly the reason that it's generally lodged there. The statute does give the commission the opportunity to put it somewhere else if it wants to. But our recommendation is to keep it where it's been with the town of Montreat since the inception of the zoning ordinance. And nobody's given us a reason to change.
This is Robert Warner. I wanted to, I appreciate Mr. Blake's expertise as an attorney on this issue. Perhaps he could address the issue of standing. My understanding of that is that it's not a black and white issue sometimes. So I guess my question is, let's say I lived 300 or 350 feet away from a proposed development, but I could show that I do have standing that the development would substantially impact my property value. Would I be correct in assuming that that it's possible that I could legally show standing?
Standing is governed by 160D-1402C, which I'll turn to. And it's too long for me to read out and explain it in this context. But basically, that limits who may file a petition challenging the decision of a Board of Zoning Adjustment or any other board on a special use permit. Again, I can't change that. That's the law of the state of North Carolina, and that is what it is.
I will just point out to looking at this, at that statute, it says standing, this is in subparagraph C, it breaks it down into 4 categories. And one is a person who has certain interests, which include property interests. Number 2, which might pick up what you're asking, any other person who will suffer special damages as a result of the decision being appealed. So that would be the standard.
All right, so it might be a legal matter for if I had an attorney, a legal matter for my attorney to prove that I do have standing.
That's right.
It's a preliminary showing anybody has to make. That's correct, in any lawsuit.
Thank
of
you.
any kind.
Thank you.
So in the spirit of clarification or clarity, I think, as you have been saying, Mr. Blake, the intention for you all has been not to make substantial changes to the ordinance. So I think as you move forward and this turns over to the Board of Commissioners, I think one of these substantial changes, as Ann Hayner has just pointed out, is that you are changing the procedure of the special use permit in such a way that there is no longer public input. So
Chapter 160D changed
That's
that.
the statute changes.
That was the statute. We have to reflect the changes in the statute, or the statute will no longer be, our ordinance will no longer be valid. The town can be sued by not following it, the requirements of section 160D, and pay attorney's fees when it loses. So we don't have a choice. That's just it.
But my understanding,
we didn't make a choice. Our only choice was to follow 160D.
but as you said earlier, you are choosing which board makes that decision, which body.
Well, we're leaving it the same.
We are recommending that the Planning and Zoning Commission not hold a meaningless hearing. Yes, I'll agree to that. We have what the statute has said, that if you want your Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, it has to be meaningless. And we've said, the town's got better resources and all the parties have better resources than to hold a meaningless hearing, which it just simply gives everybody the opportunity to say things that have to be ignored.
I'm sorry, you say—
I don't have a better way to put it, but that's just the case.
I'm sorry, you say that the statute required that if you had a planning commission meeting, it would have to be meaningless. Didn't the statute explicitly give you the option to have the planning commission rather than the Board of Adjustments make these decisions?
Yes. But
And
not-
in the previous statute, wasn't it set up such that the application wouldn't even be passed on to the Board of Adjustments unless the Planning Commission determined that it met these 7 or 8 different criteria, ranging from architecture to traffic to property values?
I don't understand what you're saying.
I don't understand. The current procedure is not valid, okay? Or at least starting July 1, it will not be valid. We can't change that, okay? I don't know. I can't, that's all I can tell you. And if you
But
can't,
just to confirm, the statute would allow you to make the decision be made by the Planning Commission with opportunities for public comment and participation, correct?
no, that's not correct. No, it would not.
So when it says,
Now, the board, you could in this ordinance remove the Board of Adjustment from the process, okay? Completely. Just take this out and make the Planning and Zoning Commission the sole body. There's only one body can make the decision, the sole body, okay, that makes that decision. And you could do that. The Planning and Zoning Commission would have to hold a quasi-judicial hearing. The rules wouldn't change on the hearing. You got to get this. A special use permit is a quasi-judicial matter. It cannot be decided in any other way. There is no way you can change that. There's just no way you can change that. The law says that 160D in 7 or 8 places. It's just the way it is.
Unless you get the legislature to change it and the governor to sign it. Okay, well, I want to thank y'all. It's now 12:15, and I really do sincerely appreciate your comments. And as I said, I thought y'all would like some of what we were going to recommend and wouldn't like others of it. And we really do appreciate the time it takes. I hope as we go forward on the stormwater and on the hillside, that we don't wait for 2 years to come raise these. We had public hearings every month, sometimes twice a month. And there were people there on some occasion, on most occasions, but there were not. I don't recall any of y'all, except perhaps John Fox was at the last one after this had come up. But we have regular public hearings. We'll be working on those ordinances, and we would sincerely appreciate your input on it. I would urge you to take a look at those ordinances now and see if you want to recommend any changes to it. And that way, as we begin, we'll have that before us.
And let me just say again,
Yes,
we
sir.
thank you for the Havener memo because you've helped us make this ordinance revisions on special use permits better in a number of ways. So thank you.
This is Kate Hayner. I was wondering if the public comments were going to be read aloud for the record.
What
were
I had
submitted.
proposed to do is to make those, you mean the written public comments?
Correct.
What I propose to do is to make those exhibits to the minutes and have them part of the public record. It will take another hour to read them. And I'd ask Susan Taylor Rash for an opinion on that. And I don't think that we really had time to get a firm opinion, but it seems to me that in the interest of everybody's time, that the reading of those comments as opposed to attaching them would be a waste of everybody's time.
I disagree, but that's my opinion.
I thought you might. If you want them read, then what I'm going to do is order them read at a special meeting, and you can just come back again. I'm not going to have them read today.
Could I just
I
request?
will entertain a motion that all the special comments that have been submitted to the town be included as exhibits to the minutes of this meeting. Does
So
someone
moved.
make that motion?
So moved.
Is there a second? All in favor, say aye. All opposed. So if that was Priscilla, I'll be happy to talk with you about that later. But I do think I don't know if any purpose would be served. We've already all read them. So if you just want to hear what you said yourself, you already know what that is. So,
I'm just curious how many comments there were, just out of curiosity.
how many comments were there?
I would say about 20.
About 20, and of varying lengths, correct? Yeah. Okay. what I'd
Yes,
like to do-
and I just want to clarify that the purpose was not to hear what I wrote. It was to hear what others had written and what their insights and opinion were.
Sure,
on
and you'll
both
have that
sides.
opportunity because there'll be exhibits to these minutes. And if you would like Angie to send you those, she'll be happy to do that. Okay, what I'd like to do now is to move to making these amendments and some others that we've already discussed to what we are going to submit to the council. So that we can move this on to the council. The first thing I'd like to do, I forgot to ask for a motion to add to amend sections 510.58 and 510.7 and add 511.10 as was referred to in the February minutes that we discussed earlier. So if someone would like to make that motion, we will then add those to to what we will be submitting to the council. Someone like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion, Mr. Chairman, that we amend the previously submitted revised ordinance by adding the new section 510.58, 510.7, and 511.10.
Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Is there any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Thank you. That's good. Dan is suggesting that we make a motion to approve the formal response that Mason had prepared. And what else?
Yeah, I would make a motion, Mr. Chairman, that we approve the formal response that has been circulated this morning and that Mr. Blake eloquently elaborated on earlier. And as a second part of that motion, that the changes to the previously submitted revised ordinance that are delineated in there that
I'm going to take those.
you will take that separately. Okay. So we just, that the board approve the formal response to the letter from Priscilla Hayner and others.
Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Is there any discussion?
Yes, sir. I had prepared something this morning.
Let's take that up separately.
Well,
Make a motion to approve that.
forgetting that, I had something that I wanted to say with regard to this full response. And it requires us to step back just a touch. Especially,
Wade, we're running out of time, so don't be lengthy.
I've heard that before many times. But special use is exactly that, a special use. We have two of them primarily in the institutional category. One is the conference center and one is the college, and there's also historical and so forth. None of those entities or stakeholders, which are major, are represented in this response because they're not in the categories, they're not in the boards and so forth. And so I'm concerned that once we went past section B and got back down to however's, where we're making these recommendations and change the ordinance, I'm concerned about two things. Number one, these two entities, major entities, their special use is their mission as a college and as a conference center. So we're not changing their special use. All of this is coming about because we're going to add some bedrooms beyond what's in the count right now. And 30 some years ago, when Dan and I alternating with co-chairs of the board of advisors, Muncie Conference Center, everybody was strongly in favor of those solicitations. And that is not so much the case, because right now, in the past couple of decades, it's far more secular.
Would you speak into the microphone, please?
Speed it up to me. And we're going to make what you said part of the record.
So the question may be whether Montreat's newer, more secular population believes the mission of MRA is on the whole an impediment to a newer desire for a peaceful retirement community. So when 310.624 says that the use and enjoyment of other property within the area which is located, that subjective view of enjoyment could block.
We can't hear the speaker.
Could block in a quasi-judicial hearing consideration of the request for adjusting that. So I'm just want to enter in the record as this passes on this response that I think there's a need for stakeholder input on these revisions we're proposing.
Okay, all right. That is heard. Is there a second to the motion that Dan has made? I think Mason made that.
Second.
Is there any other discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Now, we haven't acted on any of the specifics yet. So we want to go through in a couple of other changes that I noticed in section 107. At the end of the first sentence, we somehow omitted the words "except in conformity with this ordinance." What it says, as written, is subject to Article 10 of this ordinance. Nonconformities: no person shall use or occupy any land or buildings or authorize or permit the use of in land or buildings, which would mean it would be, you couldn't do it, period. You just say except in conformity with this ordinance, is what I propose to add. Now, where are you exactly? 107 at the end of the first sentence. Add the words after buildings, except in conformity with this ordinance. And I can't make a motion, but so someone would make. So moved. Is there a second? Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Thank you. Then there was one reference in the memo to a statute, and we may have corrected it in what Mason has drafted. And that is a reference to section 316 something. We had it. Oh, here it is. In 307A, under civil penalty, is the same one as another one I found. We refer to section 307.2. I think that should be 307.62. Is where the civil penalties are. And if someone would make the motion, where is that? 307.7A.
So part A.
The first sentence. If you look at 307.62, you'll see that's where the civil penalty is. 307.62. Correct. 307.2 talks about stop.
Yeah, got it. So moved.
There's a second.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay. No, over in 311.637, this is the one I was referring to that Painter memo picked up. There's a reference to subsection 619.37. That should be to 310.62. 311.63. I think we had previously noticed this. We just didn't have a change. 637. 311.637. About 5 lines down, the reference to 619.37 should be 310.
311.637.
No, 619. Oh yeah, 311.67. If you see 5 lines down, you see the reference to subsection 619.37. It's right here. 311.
Okay, 311. 311.637.
Right. There's a reference to 619.37.
And that should be what, Bill?
That should be 310.62.
Got it.
There is 619 is an entirely different subject. Okay, we had caught that before. So if someone would make that motion, we will proceed on that.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? And I'll just point out there is no 619.37. Okay.
I propose a motion to purchase new microphones.
310.62.
Motion be 619.37 should be proper.
310.62. To be accurate, it should be 310.62 at C. That's spelled E-T-S-E-Q. That would be what I would do. Something you make a motion?
Yes, that's make such a motion.
Second.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. Now I'd like to move to the specific recommendations and the response. And I think we picked up any changes in the document.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I found one group of words that got left out of 310.624. And again, these words are in the current ordinance. I guess my computer must have shaded something. But at 310.64, where it goes use and enjoyment of other property. Okay, after property, put comma, for the purposes already permitted, comma. That's again, just this language from the current.
Which one, what's section?
310.624.
Okay, would you read those again?
It reads, and will not be injurious to the use and enjoyment of other property, and then insert comma, for the purposes already permitted, comma. Okay. And again, that's language from the existing ordinance trying to mimic the current language.
Is there, I guess you moved it, is there a second to that motion?
I second.
Is there any discussion?
Yes, I'm opposed to that because enjoyment. We've got 400 signatures that enjoyment is compromised. And that would be a reason that the Board of Justice would deny.
Okay, thank you. Are you ready to vote? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed?
Okay, so we just have changed, we approved that one change to 310.624. Do we not need to also approve 310.621 all the way through 26 with that a change?
Yeah, let me make a motion that we with that one change that we revise 310.621 through 626, that we also revise consistent with the language in the memo 310.61 and 310.634, 635, 636, and that we add the language to 308.2 and 310.3 set forth in section D for conflicts of interest, and that we make all of those changes to the ordinance and transmit those changes to the town council.
Is there a second to that motion?
I second the motion and make one little typo correction in 310.623, Mason, where you've got 250 feet. In parenthetically, you have 250 inches.
That is noted, and as with that correction, second,
I'll second the motion, that one correction, yes.
any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? Thank you. So that passes unanimously. And I think now that we're done with our work, and we will usually we'll get this revised and we'll resubmit it to the town council. And I do want to again thank y'all for being here. We really appreciated public comment along the way. In many ways, it's sort of sad that it's the discussions about the MRA that produce these, because in many ways these would have been very helpful to have had as we've gone through the process. So I would again encourage y'all to participate in the work of the Planning and Zoning Commission as it considers the stormwater ordinance and steep slope ordinance. And with that, is there any further business? The next meeting date is May 13th from 10:30 to noon.
Hello, this is Ann.
Yes.
This is Ann Hayner. I just have one administrative point regarding the public comments received for this meeting, which I
Yes.
totally agree with. You know, we don't necessarily need to take the time to read them aloud, but I'm aware that normally the public comments, if they're attached to the minutes of the meeting, wouldn't be released until the minutes are released, which is after you approve them at the next meeting. Could we agree that the public comments received would somehow be available on the website or in connection
Yeah,
with?
I think Angie could do that. Would you do that, Angie? Post them on the website? And she is going to send a copy to Priscilla. And if you would like her to send it to you, I'm sure she'd be happy to do that. Could you email Angie your email address if you would like her to do that?
Great, thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Well, I thought you wanted to say. Again, I want to thank everybody for being here. It's a very productive and informative meeting. And with that, we are adjourned.
Thank you very much.